ahead and record. And thank you for joining us for our Public Sector Change Practitioners August webinar. So this is our bi-monthly webinar series. So thank you for being here. We're glad to have you. And my name is Kaylin Haskovic. I'm an intern at CDOT in the Process Improvement Office. And joining me on the production team is Ginger Kloska, who's also an intern and will be helping with monitoring the chat. And if you have any technical issues, feel free to send her a message and she's happy to help. And I will be hosting the webinar today. So we do want you to participate. So remember to unmute your microphone. Everyone should be muted as of now, or feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat box. So here you can see how to, I'm sure we're getting more and more familiar. We've been, I'm sure, using Zoom more in the past couple months now, but remember to unmute if you'd like to speak or put any questions in the chat box. And we'd love to have you participate. So the purpose and direction of the Public Sector Change Practitioners is to bring the group of change management professionals together so we can learn from each other and share knowledge and inspire and lead change throughout the world. And our goal as change practitioners is to ensure that everyone who's impacted by change is successful with that change.
How do you know that? You don't know that.
And so we're glad to have you, and your voice is very important to our community. So thank you for our presenters for joining us today. Make sure to share some of our content. We have a newsletter that goes out as well, so make sure you're engaging with that. We always love contributors, so feel free to reach out. And we'll be sending a survey after this webinar to get your thoughts and some feedback to make sure that this community of practice is really meeting your needs. And if you have any questions, we have the board members' information at the end. They're happy to answer any questions as well. And here is a graphic that I found from the ProSci LinkedIn page. So, you know, change is happening fast. It's not stopping anytime soon. So I think our role as change practitioners is to help others mitigate this change and to be conscious ourselves of the change that we're going through. And so I think that this is a great community to be a part of, especially during these times, and to really rely on each other and reach out and stay involved. We have a great agenda today. We have Nichelle Rogers joining us from the Office of Natural Resource Revenue. She will be speaking on diversity and inclusion in relation to change management. And we also have Dr. James King, the Director of People, Culture, and Organizational Change for QuickSpace, and also a former organizational change manager for the state of Nevada. And he will be presenting on his ACES 2.0 change management model and the change ambassador program that he implemented with the state of Nevada. So we'll have time for 1 or 2 questions for the presenters after they present, but then we'll hold off for the rest during our open forum near the end of our webinar today, and then we'll wrap up with a few just a few items at the end. So we have our first presenter, Nichelle Rogers, and we're so glad to have her back. She presented at our last webinar, and we had such good feedback, and people were really engaged, so we wanted to have her back again. And she is the Supervisor for Communication, Performance, and Change Management at the Office of Natural Resource Revenue, and the former Chief Diversity Officer, and is the current chapter president for the Denver Federal Chapter Blacks in Government, and also the former Regional Council President for Blacks in Government. So thank you, Nichelle. We're really excited to hear from you, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be back. Let's get this thing rolling. So today I'm here to talk about leveraging diversity and inclusion in change management. And so to get through the presentation, I'll offer a few definitions of diversity, inclusion, and engagement. Also talk about the relationship of D&I to change management, talk about how we leverage the two, and then talk about how we put it into action. So let's just dive right on in. Let me minimize my window here. So for diversity, inclusion, engagement, we all have our own definitions. But for today, I just want to give a couple, mostly from Merriam-Webster, but I also am adding these to support the definitions. And I just ask you to keep these in the back of your mind throughout the presentation. So for diversity, Merriam-Webster says it's a condition of having or being composed of different elements. And so we see here on the slide, preferences, experiences, thoughts, priorities, attitudes, perceptions, and habits. And when we think about the workplace, we're also thinking about talent, education, and skill sets, because all of this helps shape both our personal and professional worlds. So for inclusion, Merriam-Webster says the act of or practice of including and accommodating people who have historically been excluded. I believe Franklin Covey, that's some of my background is dealing with working with Franklin Covey. They talk about it being a state of being valued, respected, and supported. And finally, engagement, the act of being engaged, or an emotional involvement or commitment. The reason I added engagement to this definition is a lot of times we stop at inclusion when we talk about diversity and inclusion, but I like to think of inclusion and engagement in this way. Inclusion is inviting people to the party. Engagement is asking them to dance. So we invite people, we invite employees to listening sessions, but we want to make sure that we're capturing everybody's thoughts. We want to engage them in that way. If we're installing a new system, we want to make sure that our employees are engaged in training so they know how to use that well. So just keep these definitions in the back of your mind as we work through this presentation. There we go. Oh, went too fast. So the relationship between D&I and change management is a direct relationship. If you think about it in terms of, do we always talk about it together? Usually we don't. We usually keep them separate, or maybe we actually unconsciously work them in together. But really, if you think about it, when we engage in diversity and inclusion, we're inherently increasing the opportunity for change management because we're allowing our employees to get exposed to new skill sets, new experiences, cultures, et cetera, knowledge. And the same thing with OCM. If we decrease the opportunities for engaging employees in OCM, that means we're also decreasing their opportunities to learn from others, to be exposed to the diversity of thought, to the diversity of opinion and education, and et cetera. So these two are really directly related, and they both affect the morale in the organization. They're drawing from our employees' experiences, their knowledge, and especially their emotions. They impact that people side, the human and human resource. And they definitely can be embedded in the culture if done right. And most importantly, they deal with perceptions. And perceptions is important here as we go into the next slide, because what we see in a change or within diversity inclusion may not be exactly how other people see it. We all look at events or issues through this window of diversity that is made up of our experiences and all of the things that make up that diversity, the sum of a person. And so this perceptions piece is important as we move forward in the presentation. So when we talk about leveraging the two, I want to introduce the thought of applying the 4 cores of credibility. And this is a Franklin Covey concept that we worked with when I was teaching Speed of Trust and Leading Diversity and Trust. The 4 cores of credibility are integrity, intent, capabilities, and results. And I'll go through each of those credibilities. I like to call them incredibilities to think of it in a positive light. But they drive character and competence. So you'll see in this image here, character is made up of intent and integrity, and competence is made up of capability and results. So character, as you can see with intent, integrity, it's sometimes the unseen or the less visible components of the 4 cores of credibility. But it includes integrity, which is the roots of the tree. It's honesty, it's truthfulness, it's harmony. Intent becomes the trunk of the tree. Some of it is below the surface. A lot of it is above the surface, but it deals with your motives. It deals with your agendas. And then it sprouts up into capabilities, into competence. And capabilities are your ability to inspire confidence. It's the relevance with that change or with the diversity inclusion. But really it is being able to do the job. A lot of people have great intent, but they don't have the training to complete the job. And finally, the results. These are tangible, measurable purpose and product. You should see how your integrity, intent, and capabilities play out within the results. Now, what does this have to do with diversity and inclusion? Well, diversity and inclusion both shapes and is molded by the 4 cores of credibility. For instance, in terms of a change management experience, say you're going through a change and the leaders demonstrate poor integrity and poor intent. So their motive and agenda is not about the people, it's not about seeking mutual benefit. That experience for that employee could turn out to be a negative one. And when the next change comes up, they will remember kind of that negative experience they have, regardless of whether it's the same kind of change or even the same people are involved. So the experience, our diverse experiences are shaped and molded by, or shape and mold our character and our competence with diversity and inclusion, with change initiatives or whatever it might be. But there is a very close relationship between the two. The thing to think about in terms of intent, because I'll speak a lot about intent and integrity as we move forward. The motive, again, intent is motive and agenda. The motive that best builds credibility and trust is a motive that is caring for people. So when you do any kind of change initiative, if your motive is that you care for people, it's a great one that builds that relationship. The best agenda moving forward is seeking mutual benefit and being transparent. Those things build intent, they support your integrity because you're being honest, you're being truthful, you're building harmony. And then again, you'll see that in the capabilities of the employees and in the results, the progress, the measurable components of the products that result from all of that work. When you apply these 4 incredibilities, again, as I'll call them, to ADKAR or any change management model, you're building and maintaining a foundation of trust, which is huge in our change management world, we know. But you're also engaging the talents, the diverse experiences of the employees to meet mission and support function goals. So remember, intent, integrity, our character, results and capability are competence. So moving into leveraging the 2, it's really about weaving character and competence throughout ADKAR or again, any other change management model. You can look at each step within ADKAR and look at competence and awareness for each step. But for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of group them to give you an example of how it would work, okay? So on the slide here, awareness, desire, and knowledge. When employees have competence here in these 3 phases, it typically would inform leadership and change management competence in your action, ability, and reinforcement. And likewise, where you have leadership, change management, character, so your intent, your integrity, when that's displayed and demonstrated properly in the awareness through knowledge phases, it encourages employee character in the action and reinforcement. And so let's dive into it just a little bit more. So employee competence, when you introduce a change, they're concerned about their job, about having the skills to do the to work in the new environment. And even sometimes whether their expertise will be included in the conversation around that change. They want to be included. They want to be engaged, right? And so when we get that employee competence, the understanding, the buy-in, or even if they don't understand that change that you're requesting, It's going to inform how we as leaders and change managers act and what we're asking them to do. It might increase the training opportunities. It might include, new directives, new structures, new process improvements that we issue to our employees. And likewise for the character, employees are always looking for the motive or the agenda behind a change. Sometimes we change for the sake of change, and that's not good enough, right? If the best motive for intent is to care about your people, and the best agenda is transparency and just lost my thought, transparency and seeking mutual benefit. So when we do that as leaders in that first couple of phases of ADKAR, then we encourage our employees to adopt that same intent, the same motive, the same integrity in the action and reinforcement stages. We're looking to build that behavior. But as we weave competence and character, and again, you can do this for each step, and you may already be doing it and you just don't have a name for it, or you're not putting a specific step to it. But the goal with competence and character through ADKAR is to weave in improving your character and increasing capabilities. So improving your integrity and intent leads to increased capabilities and results. So how do we do it? We learn it, we live it, and we give it. This speaks directly to us as change leaders or leaders, management, whatever your role is. This is going to speak to you as an individual, okay? Learn it, live it, give it is about thinking how the 4 cores of credibility will increase your character, your intent, your integrity, and recognize or utilize your competence, so your capabilities and your results. So learn it. Let's start with learn it. We all do change management activities, and a lot of times they're built around what our employees seek. Learn it is specifically about you as an individual, especially when we're talking about diversity and inclusion. And the last time we met, we were talking more about the racial injustices and things like that. And so when it comes to those type of issues, or it comes to a contentious change initiative, you want to conduct a personal gap analysis and think about what's working for you and what isn't working for you, and then what are the available options to help you through the change. Because as change leaders, we also are going through the change at the same time, and we need to be aware of our own personal experiences and thoughts. We have to figure out what our own definitions are of an issue versus how others define that issue. We should be researching from credible sources, especially when it comes to racial injustice. There's a lot of material out there on the internet. Some of it's right, some of it's wrong, some of it's, we don't know. So make sure you're researching from credible sources. You want to stay informed about what's going on in your organization and with your people. And then identify that resource, identify a network that you can tap into for help. That will help with finding your credible sources as well. And this can always be tricky when you start looking at your personal gap analysis and talking about that, because we don't ever want to admit when we're wrong. But this is about identifying our own personal biases and then any kind of faults that we might have, and then doing something about it, which is living it. Living it is confronting your biases. It's confronting your personal fears and drivers and the reasons that you do things. But it really is about exploring the diversity, celebrating your diversity, and recognizing your diversity and what you learned about others in this phase. It involves a lot of character because, again, you're confronting your own biases. You're confronting some of maybe your own faults or things that are scaring you, right? And when you confront your own, you're able to be honest about it. You're able to create harmony in your world by discussing it. And it just helps build that character piece of you. During this phase, you also want to watch your tone and watch your nonverbal cues, because people will often look at your body versus listen to what you're saying to see if they match up. You want to set end goals or targets and really focus in on why you want to make this change and why do you want to get involved. And again, whether it's a change in the organization or something to do with diversity and inclusion, ask yourself, why is it that I want to be involved? What is it that I want to get out of it? And where do I want to be in 6 months, in a year, 5 years? The next one, have one-on-one conversations. This is a big one for me. Engage others in healthy dialogue. We are in a social environment where if I disagree with my friend, we can't be friends anymore because we disagree. And it's just gone way left. We should be able to agree to disagree. Diversity of thought is what really improves the world. When we can have conversations, tough conversations with our friends or with colleagues, it really strengthens the bond. And so have those one-on-one conversations, make it a healthy dialogue, it's okay. And the last, follow up on promises. There's nothing that builds trust more than following up on and doing what you said you were gonna do. Right here, there we go. And then the last, learn it, live it, is give it. Give it is about competence. It's about capability and results. Here we're focusing on inclusion and engagement, but I implore you to focus more on the engagement piece. And it's not just diversity and it's not just change, it's everything. Vibe check others. So once you've gotten yourself together, ask people how they're doing. Just asking someone how they're doing on any given day is a great way to break the ice. It's a great way to find out where people are in this change or in this initiative. Be vulnerable. We talked about this a little bit last time, and be vulnerable as appropriate. Sharing your fears, sharing how you feel about something, sharing whether you know something or not, being very honest about where you are is great for the people who are involved in the change or in that issue. I will put the caveat there that we're not in a Hallmark movie. So just because you share your vulnerability doesn't mean that they're going to open up right away. But I bet you they're going to appreciate hearing an open and honest moment from you. Host your listening sessions, roundtables with your employee resource groups. Remember, under Learn It, we talked about identifying that resource or the networks. Employee resource groups are great places to start because a lot of times they already have their pulse on issues that are affecting their audience. And so getting with them to talk through, listen to what they're going through, listen to any suggestions or recommendations is a great place to start. And then finally, again, we're talking about competence, which is both capability and results. Share your positive stories across the organization. I know many of you already do. Sharing these positive stories shows that you have success in your change initiative, that other people are on board and moving along with the change. And again, it's that reinforcement for the change behaviors you're seeking. So again, going back to leveraging our incredibilities, our 4 incredibilities with ADKAR or any other change in change cycle, management cycle. Infusing these 4 cores of credibility is something you're probably already doing. You just haven't put a name to it or you haven't called it out specifically. But what it really does, it adds value to this change management cycle because you're building trust, you're establishing rapport, you're demonstrating appreciation for your employees, both their own diversity and their contributions. And then finally, you're showing results. And so I just like to throw this idea of adding your incredibilities to your management cycle and just think about how it really can fuse in with what you're doing already and adding value to where you're going. And so that's it. So thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Nichelle. That was great. That was wonderful. I especially like this image here at the end. It really pulls the two together. We have time for about 2 questions. If there's any in the chat, Ginger, or feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask Nichelle directly.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and mention some things that were mentioned in the chat real quick. So Chi Perry said, by your definition, engagement equals inclusion. Chi, if you would like to kind of expand upon that, you're more than welcome to. I think it was when, Nichelle, you were mentioning about the definitions. And then, let's see. Yeah, what would be your take on that then?
Engagement to me is the next step of inclusion, if you will. Like I said, inclusion, if we're inviting everybody to our party, engagement is saying, hey, Ginger, I want to dance with you. So would you come and dance with me? Instead of just having Ginger at my party and never engaging with her. She might feel happy that she got an invitation to the party. But if I never engage her at my party, I'm not really, inviting her or embracing her as part of my initiative or part of my event.
Hi, this is Chi Perry's.
Hi.
Hi.
So to me, what you're just saying is just diversity. You invite someone in a party, but if you ignore them or you don't welcome them, you don't interact with them, then it's still diversity. Whereas inclusion, you involve them in your discussions, in your concerns, in your planning, in your defining gaps, and improvement, change management. So in itself, engagement is a practice of inclusions. And diversity and inclusion must go hand in hand in order for an organization to be successful, because doing one without the other is just like half-baked.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Chi.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone. I know we have more questions, but we want to make sure we give enough time for our second presenter, and then we'll open it up. We'll have more time at the end. So keep those in mind, put them in the chat, and we'll address them later on in the forum. But I'll go ahead and introduce our next presenter, which is Dr. James King. He is currently the Director of People, Culture, and Organizational Change Management with QuickSpace in Reno, and is a former organizational change manager for the state of Nevada. He is also ProSci Change Management certified and Lean Sigma 6 Green Belt certification in the Kirkpatrick model. So thank you, Dr. James, and we're excited to hear from you and some of the great work that you've done for the state of Nevada. If you'd like to take control of the screen, that would be great.
If we practice.
Yep. There we go. Okay.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. And I'd like to share with you some of the reflections that I've had and experience with the state of Nevada. You find that useful as we had gone through a organizational change management program. We actually stood up an office of project management for the state. I was the organizational change manager during the startup of that. And we were implementing an ERP program for our finance and human resources that we had gone through the process of getting a vendor. So it was a lot of learning there from kind of a technical perspective, and really a great opportunity to see that the state of Nevada had taken change management seriously enough to, one, include the office, but then also provide some of the opportunities that I'll talk about here, and then share some lessons learned from that. So the agenda here, there's a pretty simple and straightforward agenda. However, the useful resources, the ambassador duty description, and some change management tool list is at the end of that. That's what the asterisks are for. So if we post this, those will be available to you. Then I probably won't talk to those today. So drivers and challenges in the public sector. I think we're all familiar with these. Let's go back. We're all familiar with these, but I don't think that anything has really impacted public sector like the digital change that we're all going through, especially with COVID-19. I mean, this has just been a phenomenal change and kind of a disruption in the environment. But I think, as most people do, they take disruptions and make the best of it. And I think that we're dealing with that. But there's an expectation for government and in the digital space that is really very important for us. The IBM Center for Business and Government even though 2017 was the last time they had done a survey or done any work. I found it's a phenomenal reference for those in the public sector to look at that particular center. And I think this is a really big thing for us to kind of think about, because this is really what the purpose is for us in government and some of the things that are really emerging now. We also realize that there are some challenges in public sector. These are the things that when we talk about barriers to change that we have to deal with. I've dealt with these personally, almost all of them, as we started to go through the change management work that we were doing with this ERP implementation. And some of them that you wouldn't think, like organizational rivalries, right? That we have time to even fight and think about these things. But the idea is that there are challenges out there with regards to where budget monies go and to systems and investments and the emotional investments that people put into these things. And there's an emotional component to this that I think we have to understand and be prepared to deal with regardless of whatever type of change that we go through. So we take those positive things, we look at these challenges, and what we attempted to do was we developed a change ambassador program, because we realized one of the things that we needed to do was to be able to connect with all of the different agencies. We had 17 different agencies, just like any large state government has. And we really needed to figure out how we could connect and start to develop as champions, one for the project, but also to make a lifelong learning opportunity or leadership development opportunity. So the Change Ambassador program that we use, these are some of the things that we went behind that with. One, we had agency director support. So when we met with agency directors, we thought we had the top level leadership, assigning people that had a certain quality to them that could cross boundaries, that were able to reach above, below, and work with peers. So this was a very big selection process or selection concept for agency directors. We went through a 3-day certification program. I'll give you a peek at that here in a second. But the important thing was we really wanted to establish liaison between the offices and start that communications and start the engagement there. So that was a really big deal for us. But at the same time, one of the things that we hoped from a project perspective, that this would lend us an opportunity to support and help, but the skill itself, the leadership development, would be useful across the state. And then we would continue to learn and push people to sites like what we're doing right now, this organization here, the work that's been done to set up the public sector change professional. This program here is phenomenal. So this is the kind of community of interest that we want this people and this type of people to begin to think about. And so what we did with regards to that and why become a change ambassadors, we had a value proposition, and really the most important, I think, was the change leadership, developing the ideas of being a leader in this space in the state of Nevada and in government service. That was really the biggest part of the value proposition for us. And of course, those other things very important. But really the idea of connecting with us was to develop development and delivery of OCM tools and methodologies, and to practice and mature OCM leadership skills. And that's really what we hope to get out of that program. This is just kind of a quick overview of what the program included. Those things that are highlighted are the things that I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about this morning, and to give you kind of an idea of what we were doing. So with that, we start off with the integrated framework. And everybody's seen this. The POC folks have seen this. You know, it's really kind of this idea of the technical side of change and people side of change management. And then we looked at it from this project change integration. And when we look at it from this perspective, it seems pretty straightforward. We're doing a project, we're going to take care of people, and we really like that. But when you start to think about it and take the next level down, you start to see that most of the change management process groups are a little bit more involved than just a matter of, well, we've got people and we've got the technical project. And so what we attempted to do was to align these, and some of the things that we used in determining the change integration, things like emerging concepts here, like benefits realization from the Project Management Institute, and some of the practice guides that are out there and resourced for us, benefits realization management, managing change in organizations, a practice guide. And so when we looked at these change management process groups, we said, well, that's pretty cool. We're aligned with the project. And so as we go through each phase of a project, we should have a set of exercises or processes and inputs, outputs that we would have similar to the change management, to the project management process groups. And we thought that was going to work out really good, but what it turned out, or it felt like, I should say, is that really it became kind of a technical change management program. We have a technical project, but we have this technical change things, and for the organization, that's great. We're moving along, we're steady, we're going along, keeping up with the project the best we can, regardless of whether or not people are adopting or not. This project is going, and I think that we missed out a little bit on the people side of this, right? Because I think the people are really in the center, and technical change is good and necessary. It gets us from point A to point B, but what happens along the way is really where we started to think about this. And so at the end, you come out with something that looks like this, where we have these life cycles that almost looks to you like a like body of knowledge, right? And the body of knowledge in the process of the project management goes across these different phases, and we start to see even more the detail and the technical detail in this particular framework. And again, I kind of liken it to more of a technical approach to change management. So with that reflection on that, the ACES change model, it's 2.0. I developed one initial one with the state of Nevada. This one here I've advanced in my thought, continue to learn. I'm an avid learner. And so we kind of went on to another prospect here. And then really the couple of key things, if there's anything that we wanted to make the case for here, is that this tapestry of individual, social, and structural behaviors, because I really believe that there are some different perspectives that have to be considered as we move through this towards our commitment to service excellence, which is ultimately what we all are in public service to provide. And so with that, we've probably all seen this change curve if you've been a student of change management. We look at this curve. There are several versions of this, but really kind of what's happening is we're moving from this comfort and control state into disruption of some type. And then at some point we realize we have to get out of this. We have to go through a discovery process and ultimately strengthen. And so the ACES change model was based kind of on this concept with the realization that this happens to most people during change. There are some people that are so excited about change that they may script the disruption piece and go right on through discovery and strengthening, and that's what you'd hope for. Those champions, right? We call them typically early adopters, those kind of things in the language. But we go through this, and from this perspective here, we come to the ACES change model. So with that, we have kind of 4 concepts here. All of them, kind of the catalyst, the thing that really makes this happen is the concentration on our individual, social, and structural components to this, because this really goes through and cuts through all of this. And as we acknowledge our need to change, we realize that we need to connect to shared meaning. A lot of that shared meaning are the concepts Nichelle brought up previously. I really appreciated that and the presentation as well, Nichelle, thank you. We go through this, we enable excellence. At one point I had considered it learning and growth, but I think excellence is really what we want. And then we strengthen our commitment to these things and the various part of the commitment after and staying connected. So we'll start with this and kind of walk you through a little bit of a journey that we've taken here with the ACES model. And one of the things, just kind of the structure of the presentation in this context, is that you'll see that we'll acknowledge reality, unity, and vision. And I consider reality kind of that individual piece here, right? We embrace integrity, authenticity in our actions. This authenticity piece is very, very important. We understand through our self-efficacy whether or not we're even ready for change, and this is a really big deal. That's that inner reflection for us, and I looked at that at the individual level. But unity is a social event, right? We have to come together and have some type of compassion and appreciation for each other. And I look back at this and look at this, and it really came from a kind of a reflection and conversations regarding the past, right? It's if we don't look at where we came from, it's very difficult to go forward. So when we think of this in terms of the past, the present, the future is what we're looking at. The present, kind of that reality piece, but this past and the unity and symbols and things that meant something to other people. As we change, we can't let that get away from us, right? We can't, because other people are holding on. We have to understand that you can't begin a change project by saying, well, everything we've done in the past was screwed up. And as soon as you do that, you've just knocked somebody right in the nose, right? Because it's like, well, you mean everything up to now and the point in my life that's created me didn't matter anymore? And that's not the message we want to send. So I just want to kind of overemphasize that a little bit because I truly believe it. And then from a structural perspective, we need to start getting behind the vision, right? If we're going to go forward, there has to be a vision that goes through the entire structure, whatever that is, whether it's a public structure, state structure, your organizational structures. But there's a responsibility for leadership that own those resources and own that ability for us to move one way or the other that has to be accounted for here. And I really think the concept of equity, to add that to inclusion and diversion, I think that's a really big piece for acknowledging what the vision is. If we don't have a vision of equity, at the end of the day, we're not going to be successful. And I think our gratitude for people's service, we know that in many cases, state government employees are not paid that much. And so there's a real heart there that has to be considered in that vision. And so with that, I kind of move it forward and I keep the theme of the individual, social, and structural throughout the ACEs model and considering those influencing factors. But one of the things, as I mentioned previously, there's a leadership development component to this, right? And so we have a reflection and self-awareness as a components of leadership that we have to work towards. But I think in this, there's going to be one emphasis that I would have is this idea of health and wellness, right? We don't consider health, I think, enough with regards to that, and it's often overlooked. And some of the things are mental health, spiritual health, the physical health to help us get through these, our social health, environmental health, all of these health components, they come out of nowhere, right? And are very influential in our lives. But if we don't consider them and acknowledge where we stand with regards to that, we only look at, are you ready to train? Do you have technical competence to work on a computer? And if we stop there, again, we start to miss the bigger picture of people. The unity piece here, our relations and our ability to engage, as Nichelle mentioned earlier, is such an important task, but it's often very difficult for people to communicate. It's easier to communicate than to really connect with people. And that engagement piece and relationship is really about the connection. And then again, the structural, there's a responsibility here, the alignment, accountabilities, accessibility for people. Accessibility is a very big deal that we have that. And so that kind of continues, the idea here is that we continue to push down the accountability. We recognize these, but what is the structure doing for us? And are there things here that are going to be important? And so with that, we move on and we kind of see what the idea here that we need to connect to shared meaning. And typically after this, I'd show our state of Nevada strategic plan, or strategic priorities, and we would have this connection component to shared meaning because we do have shared values, and those shared values should cut across organizations and influence individuals' behaviors, right? So with regarding the shared meaning, some of the things that we can do is we need to understand our goals and how we begin to understand what we want. If we don't understand what we want as individuals, it's going to be very hard to connect because it really takes out the dialogue. If I can't express to you what my expectations are, it's going to be very difficult for me to have that conversation with you, an honest conversation. So first we look at our own individual goals, but if we look at it as us as an individual, we have to also look at other individuals because they're doing the same thing, right? Other people have their own wellness plan, their own networks, and how they want to develop themselves. And if we don't appreciate people on that level, moving down and getting harmony in the social level becomes much more challenging because we start to lose that idea of a common practice, right? A common charter, where we're going. And we really don't know where to think about this in terms of sponsorship. We all know that active and visible sponsorship, how important that is. But really, I think when you typically talk about coaching and mentoring, I think now that's also shifted a little bit to coaching and sponsorship. I think people are looking more, rather than just to be mentored and have somebody talk to you about the great opportunities that are out there. But really the idea here is from an equity perspective, how are we reaching out and sponsoring people to get to the next level? They need help. That's the whole purpose of having a network. It's not what the network, how big and what the network can do for you. It's what your network can do for others. And if we don't have that perspective, oftentimes we lose the concept of what we're even doing inside of these wonderful networks we have. And then finally is kind of this journey, this structural journey, because change never stops. If we go back and look at the IBM piece for government, we see that we've got several iterations of these, and these things continue to happen. New ideas, new expectations from our constituents in the public sector create these things that are expected for us. And so the kind of the concepts of leadership, our decision quality, and strategic alignment, if we think in terms of that. But then we also look on these ideas of readiness. And readiness is really an interesting topic and has been, as I've done several readiness assessments, the environmental readiness. And when we looked at this in terms of readiness, one of the things that became apparent is that you either do a survey and you admire the results, it influences it, and nothing else, you admire the problem and the expectation, or what you realize is that we are so not ready that there are things we have to fix before we do the change, that we're going to have to start to push this to the right. And if I got project managers out there, they're going, what? You never tell anybody that. We're not going to the right. We're going to try to fix this now. And so understanding our readiness is very important. But on the flip side of that is operating in a state of excellence all of the time really starts to increase our readiness. And some of the competencies and core concepts that I'm sharing are some of the lessons that we learned there. And I didn't mention the core concepts, where they came from. These were adapted from the Baldrige framework. For those familiar with the Baldrige framework for excellence, I really love that as an operations model. I think it cuts across everything. One that I would love to continue to talk about and champion with you, but those are those kind of concepts that go along with this. So as we connect with each other, we start to look at enabling excellence and what are we going to do. And so the things that the individuals, we're looking for this exploration piece, and I think that's a big thing. With insight and sensitivity and self-awareness, very big deal for us. Do we have that in our lives? And we start to enable collaboration. We start having a shared meaning in how we're actually going to solve problems, and enabling communities of practice like we have here. A wonderful place to bring things on. There's a lot of different organizations, state agencies or state-oriented organizations out there to support collaboration. And then ultimately innovation. We encourage civility, and there's been no greater time for us to encourage civility than now. I think we'd all kind of agree on that. And so with our innovation, we're looking at these positive access for people to thrive. And this is a structural component, right? This is something the organization leadership needs to be thinking about. And again, I'll reemphasize why I went down this road here to move towards innovation and keep that structural piece, because as leaders, we become the structure, right? There's an idea that we're all going to change. We have these leadership and social skills, and most of us manage these teams or supervise these teams. But when we start to think about the real change, it's going to have a conversation about the structure, because our structure will drive our behaviors whether we like it or not. And that's a thing from that perspective, the leadership perspective. And so as we look at this here, we start to see that these are some things that we can do across this. Our humility and sensitivity is a big deal for each of us, but also priorities. And if we don't understand that things are priorities, we really have a challenge here. We have to be able to enable those and look at it, engage, enable, and empower people. And again, those are structural things that need to happen. And if we don't have that in our structure, we're going to have a very difficult time changing anything, right? So again, from an individual, we find this meaningfulness and purpose, and then ultimately we figure out how to take that and allow people to be empowered, and our structure can support them. And at the end, ultimately, at the end of this is strengthening commitment, right? We want to strengthen people's capability, our capability, inspire accountability, and having that accountability conversation. I'm a big fan of the Vital Smarts Crucial Accountabilities. I'm an instructor in that. It's taken me 4 or 5 times already to actually start to really get it. Our collective engagement, okay, that includes the diversity and inclusion component of that. That's that collectiveness, that's the equity included in that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the human experience, right? If we have a structure that doesn't have leaders looking for how we strengthen this human experience and foster and build confidence in each other, we have kind of a fail on that end. And so some of the things that may help us with the strength in our commitment is the engagement in public-private partnerships. That's really an emerging concept now. We saw that going through COVID-19. Professionalization and continuing programs that we have right here, and establishing a performance culture. And I'll kind of always make that plug for Baldrige and for you to consider Baldrige framework going forward. So if we looked at some of these concepts that we've gone through here in the ACES model, I really try to make it where it was more an orientation towards people, a leadership development competence program, and some of the outcomes of that moved along. But we had the C5 change framework, and it's just how we do things here, what we want to be able to do with the C5, calibrate, create, collaborate, connect, and commit is kind of this people orientation towards the project. And then you can see kind of the things that have to be done. And we look at, by being able to do this, we can apply the ACES model to share through kind of a reformed management framework that I believe is more people oriented, but still it has this technical, there's enough technical components to this to actually get some work done and move us forward. So with that, I had at the end of this, that's the end of this part of it. If I don't go too far, get us out of here. I think that may be it. I don't know if I have another one, Kaylin.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, open it for discussion. Here, in this, I'll just go, there's a change ambassador description, some useful resources here that I considered influential in developing this, and that's where we are. So, and if you want to connect with me, James R. King on LinkedIn, I'd look forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you very much, Caitlin.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. Very wonderful. And that's a great list of resources that you have here. So this will be posted on our website for those who want to dive in and read a little bit more. That will be available here shortly. We are running a little short on time, so I'm just going to open it up to the two of you, if that's okay. If anyone has any questions for either Nichelle or Dr. James, feel free to unmute and ask that way, or put them in the chat, and Ginger can help us if there's any questions.
Go ahead and start here. We had one question, and I apologize for the pronunciation. I think it's Kofries. She said, or he, wonderful, deep, and detailed info for Dr. James, saying, if there was one quick elevator pitch for the ACES model compared to ProSci, what is it that makes this unique?
I think the uniqueness of this is the accountability components that include accountability for, at the individual level, accountability for us socially to be able to support and help each other, and never forget the accountabilities of the structure, the structural components, and that realizing that many of times barriers and benefits are managed at a structural level. And so from a leadership perspective, being able to control and manage the structure and understand the structural impacts, I think take it to a little bit different level, or maybe another level, but accountability includes the individual, social, and structural components.
Great, thank you. And if anyone has any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat or go and ask them out loud.
I have a question. I think it's more of a problem statement, maybe, and any ideas of ways to address it. And that is through the change process, working with the emotional kind of component to people clinging on to their own sense of autonomy, and wanting to, of course, cling to what they were doing before so that they feel competent in what they're doing, and having the difficulty in realizing that they have a learning process ahead. And so I'm wondering, you were really great at talking about the people perspective, but do you have any ideas of when you've tried a bunch of different things and still that remains for a team feeling on one hand, yes, we need to do this, and on the other hand, it's really frightening?
Well, I really liked the idea that Nichelle, I think she really emphasized the idea of engagement. And I think if you looked at it from the personal perspective, one of the often looked at, I think, as the last thing to do is to ask somebody to dance and to actually sit down and have that personal conversation. But everything that's revolved around that or involved in that is developing trust. And so not knowing the level of inclusion that's been attempted or where you have that personal experience and that personal trust developed, I would default for that, asking the person to dance with you. And I don't know how far that's gone, but I really like that concept that Nichelle shared with us earlier.
That's great. Yeah, especially like the dance thing. That's definitely going to stick with me. Another question for Nichelle we have here. Susan says, perhaps diversity of thought and opinion is more difficult in today's political climate than diversity of race or ethnicity. What are your thoughts on that? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
I forgot I muted, yes. I was getting ready to go. You know, that's a great question because so I shared in our last meeting that I've had issues with my mom because my mom and I have severe disagreements on a lot of political thoughts and opinions these days. But a couple weeks after we had that meeting, I actually went over to my mom's house and we sat down for probably a couple hours, and we found that we both agreed on the root issue, like what the problem was, but disagreed on how to get to the solution. And part of that was because my experiences and what I've witnessed and seen in my life because of my race and my diversity is different from hers. And so when we talked about those experiences and why we believed and thought the way that we did, it really opened the conversation up even more. So I think it is, although the thoughts and opinions are definitely kind of driving a lot of the discourse these days, I do still think that it has a lot to do with the backgrounds and how we're viewing things through our window of diversity, because it all shapes our thoughts and our opinions. So I think they are all deeply rooted in how we came up, who raised us. And my mom raised me, but I still had different experiences because I'm also a different race than my mother. So I think all of it plays together. Great question though.
It's a great question. And we have time for about one more, if there's one in the chat or if someone wants to unmute.
I'll see if anyone would like to unmute. Otherwise, we do have one from Michelle. She says, Nichelle, that's kind of funny, Nichelle. Nichelle, have you ever experienced a situation when you saw the negative results of how non-inclusion really impacted a change project, or vice versa, or a positive experience?
Yes. A number of years ago, we implemented a new computer system, and we brought one part of the organization in, asked for their feedback, asked them to test, asked them to get all involved, and then they didn't even get a component built in that new system. And we started a new modernization program 2 years ago, and they were like, well, we don't want to be involved because you guys didn't use our thoughts and information last time. So it took a lot of groveling and like, please, 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 pretty please, with trays on top, and actually demonstrating that we were not only including them in the conversation, listening to what they had to say, but we were using it. And 2 years later, we are looking as an organization at a whole different way of defining compliance for our organization and how we might move forward in our to-be state. And kind of going back to the question that was asked of Dr. Jim, I'll say, when people, you know, are fearful of trying to learn something new or don't want to go to that place of trying to learn something again. I think, as you said, like getting down to what the root issue is it if they had a bad training experience before, or if they never felt like they got truly trained, that might be what's causing them to be fearful of trying to learn something new. And so you might have to grovel a little bit more. You might have to get down in the mud, get down in the dirt, and work past some of that anger or fear in order to move forward to that, as Jim was saying, that connecting to shared meaning. You know, I think we do have to do a lot of groveling in our jobs. and I think that's what builds that relationship. That's what connects us to each other. So Yes.
Well, thank you,
Fantastic.
Nichelle. We're running short on time, so just I wanted to thank you both. That was a great presentation, and I really appreciate you being here, and everyone else for being a part of this.
Great.
We're always looking for presenters and for contributors to our newsletter, so continue to stay involved and feel free to reach out to us, and we'll send a survey after to see if there's gauge some interest. And share this community also with your network, and so we can continue to grow. This is our website. This is where the slide deck and this recording will be posted. We also have a LinkedIn group that is growing, is relatively new. So if you'd like to join that as well, I encourage you to do so. You can just search in LinkedIn or reach out to us for the link. And here are our board members' information if you want to reach out to them as well. But thank you everyone for being here today, and continue to stay involved, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.